السلام عليكم جميعا. All right. Thank you so much for attending today webinar. As always, today we have our new guest speaker, Dr. Randa Diab. Hello, Dr. Randa.
Hi, Dr. How are you doing? Good to see you again.
Thank you so much. Dr. Randa Diab Bahman is a lecturer and author in the field of business management. Her research focus on applied psychology, decision making and behavioral, as well as social responsibility and reputation. She has a variety of publications in the field, including 3 books. She is also a columnist in a local newspaper, specializing in addressing the need for social change and sustainable development. Dr. Diab Bahman received her first doctorate from France and currently undertaking the second PhD from University of Reading in UK. Also, she recently received prestigious Pandemic Hero Award for her academic and social effort throughout the COVID-19 crisis, given the distinguished member of the Kuwaiti Society by the British Council and Diwan Al-Amiri. Thank you so much, Dr. Randa, for accepting my invitation. You have 45 minutes for your presentation, and then we'll open the floor for any question. Of course, the audience, they can ask you after your presentation. They can just raise their hand, or they can write their question in Q&A below the screen. Please don't write your question in the chat, because the chat keeps rolling and I can't read or catch your question. This webinar is already recorded and live in YouTube. Thank you again, Dr. Randa, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you for this initiative. We learn a lot through this beautiful, these workshops that you continuously do. So we thank you for giving back to the society and giving us a chance to give back as well. So I appreciate every time you've invited me. So today we're gonna talk about the lessons that we learned during the COVID-19 pandemic. Partly, I mean, it's a multitude of different subjects that we studied as social scientists that we'll try to bring to the limelight, particularly dealing with online education. So if you'll allow me, I will start sharing my slides. Okay, you're going to have to give me permission, Dr. Ahmed, to share my slides, if you don't mind. So while Dr. Ahmed is doing that, I'll just give you a background. Obviously, you've seen my bio. I lecture in the business management, and I do a lot of research in the field. I've only been very active, actually, within the last two and a half years. Right when the pandemic started was when I really realized my passion and my need to have questions answered. And I felt that the entire time, I'm still new to academia. If you look at the conventional timeframes, I've been around here and there doing part-time work for maybe the first 4 or 5 years of my academic career. And then I really took off after that. Once I realized that I was kind of just waiting around for things to happen and for people to give me an opportunity to conduct research. So a light bulb went off when I was sitting during the pandemic, and I decided to go from there and do my own research and start my own little tangents off of things that I wanted to investigate and subjects of interest. Doctor, did you manage? Oh, here we go. All right, so I will start sharing my presentation. So this should be a piece of cake now because we've been doing it all pandemic long. We recently stopped doing online learning using Zoom. And of course, I'm not sure about you, but I believe 99.9% of the people around me, at least my colleagues in academia, I don't think we've ever heard of Zoom. Even as a professional working a blue collar job, I didn't hear about Zoom before this. I knew Skype a little bit. I knew, the typical MSN Messenger and whatnot, but Zoom wasn't really popular until the pandemic came along, and it evolved and helped us evolve. This is also something that I've studied along the way. So online learning lessons from COVID, we're going to start by giving a little bit of reason behind this. And as I told you, I kind of had I really did drive to pave the way for whatever research that I wanted to do. And I know a lot of us go through this. It's so scary at first. It's very, yes.
Dr. Randa, I think you have lag. You have a lag in your internet. I think you have a problem. So I believe if you switch off your camera until you finish your presentation, and then you can switch on your camera again. I think it will help you, so we can hear your voice clearer.
Sure. Let me do that. And if that doesn't work, I can switch it to my phone internet.
Okay. Let me help you. Just a minute. Okay. Okay. Try now. I hope it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Just let me know if it lags again. I'll switch it to another internet. This is the third one. We've had problems last week, like I was saying. The fact-based decision-making is very important. For example, when we were during the pandemic, lockdown and everything was closed and we really couldn't rely on any statistics. We really didn't have much information. We didn't even know what was going to happen the next day. So in general, in the MENA region, particularly in the GCC and particularly in Kuwait, we have a problem gathering data, at least authentic data or data that we can use for academic purposes, where we have to really prove the source of the information, how the information was obtained, and ask the right questions, because it's a cultural thing. Not many people want to participate in this. So during the pandemic, it was essential. And what I felt was everybody around me wanted to help because we all wanted answers. So this really opened up Pandora's box, so they say. So what we did was we found pockets of volunteer tanks, whether the pandemic really highlighted how people wanted to help. So some people went on the ground and helped. Some people volunteered at shelters, at whatever. We volunteered in trying to make sense of it all. Us academics who really joined forces. Yeah, I think my internet is terrible, isn't it, Doctor?
Sometimes it's okay, and sometimes it's like so. If you want, we can wait you for 2 or 3 minutes until you switch to your mobile internet. Maybe it will be. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sure. Let me do that. I think that'll be better. I apologize for this. Just give me 2 minutes. I'll be right back.
No worries. It's happened. Thank you.
Okay. Did I disconnect? I didn't disconnect, right? All is okay?
Yes. Yes, Doctor.
All right. Let's get going. Sorry about that. All right. So we did this through pockets of volunteers. We went around calling each other, online seminars, committees, connecting and networking, using social media. Basically, we used every platform we can to try and get the research out, to try and get the surveys out. And like I said, everybody at this time was really willing to participate. And that's why we got a good amount of data, or at least data that we can navigate through and make sense of. And the whole thing during the pandemic revolved around the idea that no man is an island. No man can stay alone. And I think getting to those really pivotal and showing people's authenticity really boiled down to the fact that we needed each other, whether it would be for science, for survival, whatever, taking everything away, the noise that we live through on a daily basis. No man is an island. Everybody wants to be near others. We're human. We can't be alone. So this really helped us push through and get some good data. Sorry, what is this? I can hear some a replay, Doctor.
عندي ما في شيء. Everything is okay. If there is a replay, you need to mute one of your phone maybe or your laptop. Maybe there is one of them. You open it in YouTube or.
Okay. Would you check the chat and mute them all, or?
For us, we are okay.
All right. Now it's gone. It's gone now. So again, back to how how this got initiated, all the research that we're going to do, we started all of this during the pandemic. It revolved around creativity, activity, and service, anything that we can get our hands on, any data, any place that we can start with, because we really didn't know where to start. What are we looking for? What are we really trying to gain out of all of this? Is it a scientific contribution? Is it a social contribution, emotional contribution? What's the question and how is it going to be answered? These were really difficult obstacles to overcome. So we couldn't really streamline them until the data came in. Then we said, all right, we need to focus on here. And it, looking in retrospect, looking back at it, you could see that it was a little bit of creativity, activity, and service, because it dealt with different elements of this notion of humanity. And being a social scientist, this was very important. Okay, so the importance of fact-based policymaking in the COVID era. We found that there is no pre-archives. Where are we going to start? Again, this is one of the most difficult obstacles. We wanted to do research. Okay, so where are you going to start? Do you have anything similar to this? And of course, as you know, as an academic, you really need to prove or have a story. So there's no pre-COVID archives. Where can I find information? I can't just say, hi, my name is Dr. Renda. I'm conducting a study. No, I have to do a literature review. I have to dig deeper. I have to find a starting point or at least some kind of argument. So the importance of what we were doing, when I say we, you'll see that I had a couple of, we had a nice, a few people, a nice group of people that were participating in the different studies. We had no archives. We don't know where to start. And the first thing that came to mind was, if you lived in Kuwait, you would know that, God forbid, the times of the war or during the Gulf War, we lived through these times. And it was very similar in a way, in that we were locked down. We really didn't communicate with one another. We really, except now we had the social media and stuff. But that was the first thing that, rang a bell, that these times reminded me of back then. And then I take that notion one step further and I say, well, back then we didn't archive anything. So we have a problem. Therefore, we must archive what we are going through currently, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, it's got to be done. We have to archive it. God forbid we're going to need it in the future. But you know what? We don't have anything archived from the past. We really got to understand what we're going through. For whatever reasons, we have to archive it. There was also a VLE, an online learning curve, the virtual learning environment. As you know, it's not new. It's nothing new. Online learning, whatever you want to call it, VLE, online learning, Moodle, all of these things have not just been invented. They've been around for over 20, 30 years. We've all seen an online course here and there, right? But the problem was, the successful aspects of a learning environment, there's one main rule of thumb. You've got to take it voluntarily. So when you have online courses and you take them voluntarily, that's the conventional way of taking them. Voluntarily meaning you chose to do this online course and you went into it knowing what to expect. So online learning wasn't really something new. However, online learning during a pandemic, given the current type of pedagogies that we have, given the current curriculum, given the current outcomes expected and learning objectives, it was a disaster. We couldn't just take a whole curriculum, whether it be in higher education or, for example, my kids are they range in age. So they've got, even middle school, high school, everybody was affected by this. You couldn't just pick up a whole curriculum and implement it online. It was very difficult. So there was a learning curve, although there was a whole lot of online going on, right? So whether it's direct online education, or for example, when my kids go to school, they use iPads, they use laptops. We're all very tech savvy, but switching from a classroom-based curriculum to an online curriculum as is was a nightmare. So we had to say, who are the main stakeholders? What is it that we're trying to figure out? And what side of the story do we want to investigate? Me as a parent, and me as a teacher, and me as a researcher, I had to pick a side. I had to see it from somebody's point of view. And what really struck a nerve with me was that the continuous pouring, or the continuous maybe social stigmas that we kept having reiterated even throughout the world, not just here in Kuwait or in the Arab world, where it was very maybe pessimistic, where the outlook was very, the adults sat around and tried to make this the students' fault, and the teachers couldn't figure it out. I mean, the poor teachers. I was a teacher myself, and we couldn't keep up. We couldn't keep up with the demands of one party, let alone the students, let alone the parents. Of course, the parents had their hands full, so we really had to choose a side. So these were some of the obstacles. Now, what we did was we came up with a bunch of studies. We had to start somewhere. So I still get this backlash where it's, Doctora, why are you guys doing it? Why did you investigate it from here? Why? Because I had to start somewhere, and I had to have a story, and I really didn't have anything else that I can really bank on and grab it as my base. So I chose at random, whatever it is was in front of me that I felt needed to be investigated. The first thing that we looked at was the impact of COVID-19 on conventional work settings. So my first study wasn't exactly VLE. It wasn't exactly education related. Why? Because back then we were not even thinking about switching to online. It was still up in the air. But what was at the forefront of our worries was our jobs. Everybody was locked down. So I wanted, or myself and my colleague, Dr. Abdullah Anisi, we wanted to have a look at what's going on emotionally, socially, professionally, in the workplace, because a lot of us, had to do stuff from home. It wasn't really clear what was expected of us. Are we going to get fired tomorrow? All these thoughts went through our heads. So we wanted to understand a little bit about the impact of COVID-19. And at the time, it was one of the first studies that was out there. And as you can see, it's part of the International Journal of Sociology and Social Policy. They took it from a sociology perspective, because to these academics, it was more of a scan of what was going on in different parts of the world, what was common, and how we can compare them. Another one was investigating the impact of COVID-19 on undergraduate students using VLE. So now we move to the other stakeholders, the students. As soon as the private universities, at least here in Kuwait, and I think we were amongst we weren't the first ones to go ahead and implement online, but we also weren't the last ones, but we're somewhere in the middle. Once we started doing that, we picked up some momentum into investigating how the undergrads were getting used to the online learning environment and how it affected them. And both of these papers had assessments and instruments that were used worldwide. So we were one of the first people to come up with these instruments. And they were compared with other regions, and the findings are pretty interesting, because you'll see a lot of similarities, especially with the undergrads. So I'm going to go ahead now and give you a couple of the papers. I'll just do the abstracts, and if you want to know more, I've cited the paper, so you can go ahead and have a look at them. So this is one of the first papers, like I said. We looked at the conventional work setting. So the stakeholder is basically the worker. We still didn't get to online learning. This is 2020, right? As you can see. So what was found was that most employees agreed that old working conditions, OWC, needed to be reviewed, and that current working conditions were in comparison, basically what we did was we compared old working conditions to current working conditions, which was during the pandemic. So what changed? How did it change? There was a lot of negative sentiments. No, this is bad. This is good. We don't want online. We don't want remote work. But many of the people found it very flexible. And they remain the same. If you look at their opinions, perhaps their opinions didn't match their output. What we figured out in this particular research was the output was pretty much the same or positively impacted. It wasn't negative. You still had the same output, if not more. Now, I can go on explaining why this was, but of course, this needed a different or a more elaborate research, and I'm very limited in my word count. So this is just scratching the surface and telling, society, hi guys, we see that your opinions on remote work, whether you are a company or whether you are an employee, sometimes it's negative. However, if I want to measure your productivity is basically equal to or above what you would do in a regular setting in your workplace. And you told me that because I went to the primary stakeholder and asked him. The primary stakeholder in this case is the employee. Also, if given the option at the time, hybrid wasn't possible, but we were looking at, well, if it's possible, how's it going to be? Most of them said they're able to conduct at least 80% of their work expectations. I mean, there's many more findings in the paper. They were able to conduct meetings more efficiently. This paper actually was published in Al-Qabas newspaper as well, the findings of it. And there was actually a preference. This is where the interesting parts kick in. There and you'll see a lot of this in the papers too. There was there was a larger acceptance for remote work for women, from women, I mean. So women said to us in this survey, we actually, we accept remote work more so than going to the office. And now, 2 years later or 3 years later, we understand a little bit why. Because it gives them more flexibility, it gave them more, I think the outcome of that one was not only was it flexible, and they had more family time as well. They had more time to spend with their children on their schoolwork. But I think one of the primary reasons was that they can conduct their work at their own time. So they can block off a certain time of the day, get the work done, and that's it. And I think that was one of the most interesting findings for that paper. Another lesson that we learned, this is the second paper, emotional impact of COVID-19 on undergrads, and look at which field or which subject matter it went to, schizophrenia and related psychosis. Here we looked at the impact from a more emotional, a more psychological point of view. If you look at it collectively, you'll see that there is a common grounds, whether it would be looking at the impact of COVID on the workplace or on undergrads or wherever you look. There was a lot of psychosis and a lot of psychology involved. Now, how do I present that as a social scientist? I have to look at it from a multidimensional point of view. It involves emotions. It involves society, because my society and my expectations from my society impact my emotions, and therefore they can impact the outcomes of my learning. The environment I'm in, especially when I'm in a lockdown, this can be very vital to a lot of the students. We figured that out as well. For example, the environment in terms of where they live, where they live, even the number of bedrooms, even the number of rooms in the house really impacted the students and impacted their learning. It was found in this research. Virtual learning was deemed less efficient than in-class learning. However, the majority agreed that despite the emotional stress experience, most respondents reported having a positive outlook towards the future of their education. Again, this is part of what you think as opposed to what you do. So I think it's bad for me, it's affecting me mentally, but let's look at productivity. Is it really impacting you negatively? How much are you impacted by these sentiments, and where do you go from here? So these papers were very much scratching the surface again. Now we all know that if given a scenario where I have to choose, should I do in-class learning, full mode in class, or online. Of course, the students at that time, it's a 2021 publication, but the research was conducted in 2020. Online or virtual learning was still new to them. So this was part of these, which contributed to this being deemed less efficient. Now, as time went on, we saw a change in sentiments. We saw them actually wanting to do more online. So this was one of the first papers as well for the emotional impact of learning on undergrads. Then we went a step further. We said, what's the effect of attendance on student performance on virtual learning? So again, we're looking at different elements, and for no particular reason other than that was our problem at the time. And going back to the idea that we wanted to archive everything. So in this paper, we examined the correlation between your academic performance. Again, we wanted to be objective. We didn't want it to be so subjective. We had to stay on the objective route. So, okay, you can tell me your opinion, and I will not say no. I'm not going to deny your experience, whether it's good or bad or ugly or sad. But I need a measure that's going to help me really decide whether this is impacting you in a positive way or a negative way. So we decided to choose your academic performance and your attendance of e-learning. Now, by the time we did this research, they've been using online for about 6 months. So they've caught on at this point, right? And we saw that many of them, the ones that used to never attend their classrooms, they were straight, and they had full marks when it came to attendance. And this was a positive sign. It's great because this is one of the positives of online learning, that it's vast reaching. You can access it from anywhere. So the students that couldn't make it to the classroom really benefited from e-learning. But we wanted to see how it was impacting the overall performance. So interestingly, we saw a negative correlation between attendance and grades. As we know, there was a lot of hype and a lot of attendance, particularly high, when we told them, or we weren't allowed to ask them to turn the cameras on. And again, this was based in Kuwait. So many of the students didn't have to turn their cameras on when they attended the online lectures. So we saw that, you could have a perfect attendance, but, the honest students wouldn't attend. They wouldn't attend for whatever reasons. And then they would go and see the recording to make sure that they didn't miss anything in the classroom. But the ones that, just wanted the grades for attendance, they attended, and their grades were terrible when they did their assessments, which obviously shows us that there's a problem in that they're either not understanding what we're saying online, or that they weren't attending per se altogether, that it was just, some button they clicked and they went back to sleep. And of course, the year of study, which year you're in, also had an impact. So the more mature students, you really didn't have much of a problem. But the younger ones, the ones that the COVID graduates, the poor things that came in from the high schools, or were first or second year COVID students, these were really impacted. And I don't blame them. This is by no means putting a negative spotlight on the students. We were honestly trying to just understand what was going on. This is a recent paper, Student Wellbeing and Overall Performance in Higher Education. So in this paper, we use something called the College Students Subjective Wellbeing Questionnaire. There's plenty of questionnaires out there. And of course, as scholars, you guys know that we have to have validated questionnaires, validated constructs. So this was a very simple questionnaire that we took from a very credible but yet simple questionnaire that's academically viable. And we used it to see if there's any psychological implications or correlations between well-being and grades. So we wanted to see, is it true that if you're an A+ student, you're happier than an A- student? Because this was what was happening. We were getting a lot of students that were being impacted by everything, of course, COVID, and then they get their grade and they're not happy with it. They're either getting, really bad grades or really, really good grades to the point where you're speculating, how did they get these grades, right? So we wanted to see, the previous paper told us that you're experiencing some emotional setbacks. How is this impacting you? Let's dig a little deeper. Is it true that the higher grades you have, the happier you are, and therefore we can downplay the emotional aspect as opposed to deny it? So what we did here was the findings. Did I put the findings here? Yeah, so they're not correlated to grades. It can be concluded that what we did was we took the questionnaire, we took the outcome of the questionnaire, and we tied it to your overall grade. Again, we're trying to be subjective. So does it impact it? Does it not impact it? And realize that it's not correlated, right? So it's not about the conventional wisdom of you being happier, you getting a certain better grade, and you being sadder, you're getting a worse grade, right? But then again, I can't say why, right? I can't say. It could be because they cheated. It could be because at the time, they were stuck at home with their children. I don't know why. So it's very important to understand the scope, the limitations, and the outcomes of these research types. And I get a lot of that, feedback from when we hold seminars like this. Doctora, this means, are you trying to say this? No, I'm not trying to say anything. What I'm trying to do is report what was happening at the time. And of course, at the end of all research papers, we have to say, future research, or we make a call for future research. And of course, much of what we explain is this is a preliminary exploratory research that is shining the limelight on certain issues that we are facing currently. Here's another one. This was one of the most comprehensive ones. It was for a book. It was a book chapter. And we were looking at what was going on in Kuwait. This book is really fascinating because it has chapters from different academics around the world. So in my case, I gave them what was going on in Kuwait. And you have to remember that this is a time where we were all in lockdown. We barely spoke to each other. It was all we had was the internet. So what are the pros of having online? Cost savings, encourages planning skills. It reduces employee turnover. This is from an employer's point of view. This is not rocket science. This is not something we invented recently. We all know that there are some positives to remote work. It's flexible, accessible. You can access it from anywhere from home. And also VLE is the same. So I had to use some kind of stepping stone. The stepping stone was remote work. There's some kind of overlap with VLE because they have these things in common. They're flexible, they're accessible, and you can use different forms of engagement. The cons, slow connection, as we're still experiencing. And at the time, there was a lack of laptops. We had to, whoever was selling laptops really skyrocketed the prices. The students weren't ready in terms of having, even the workers, even us. Many of us didn't have laptops just for work. Lack of staff and student experience, limitations, there was plenty of that. And till now, there is no one size fits all. So this is what I did. I went around the different universities and I tried to see what was going on. And this info was through the grapevine. I really didn't have a source of contact. I mean, we had friends here and there, but we had students, we had parents, we had people talking to one another. And to this day, I don't know if this data is true. And of course, in the chapter, it says this is unofficial information gained from, and it states the sources and whatnot, right? So before Zoom, before all of that, people went looking for Big Blue. Some people are still using it, MS Teams. Some people are still using it, Whiteboard. Some students and some teachers and some entities were more prepared than others. So at the time, we were using Moodle. We were already uploading stuff on Moodle, and the students had access and had a little bit of knowledge onto that learning environment. But many others didn't, right? So even in my kids' school, they were lucky because they were already they had a little bit of integration between technology and education. So this is what went on in Kuwait. We took a little bit of time looking at these different elements, what everybody was using, because that's part of research. You have to look at best practice, what everybody else is doing, and compare your notes. And we saw that many of the places were having a problem, not so much with with the IT components or coming up with strategies. What they were having problems was all the other stuff that couldn't be explained, whether it be from their workers or whether it be from their students. One of them was institutional response, and we call these ideals or the workload. Ideals are basically the informal deals that we make with one another, whether it be in school, teacher, student, or whether it be employee, employer. These are relationships that are informal. So it's basically what you expect. So institutional response was a big deal. And even after the pandemic, we saw a big migration for many people who quit their jobs and moved from one place to another because institutional response was a problem. Some institutes or some companies, they didn't communicate. This sparked a lot of fears. This sparked a lot of rumors. But the ones that survived properly were the ones that kept communications open and actually were open and clear, or to whatever degree you could be clear at the time, about the workload and about the work expectations. Another important component was the emotional implications. Again, this showed up in our several of the research, the stress, the motivation. But so long as the institute was communicating, whether to the students or to the employees, this was something positive. Social implications, this was another big deal for everyone. And this is part of the reason when we discussed the reasoning for why we had gender differences when we did most of the COVID research. This was one of the biggest explanations that we used. So, for example, women, I don't want to say preferred, but they had more of a preference than men to stay home and do remote work. Why? Primarily for family obligations. But another big one was ergonomics, which means the spacing of your house. So as we know, in this part of the world, some people get married, they live in their in-laws' house. It's, a 1 or 2 bedroom space. And I mean, there's a large number of women that experience that, particularly in higher education. So the ergonomics really played a big part in it. This was also part of the reasons that we pushed for the admins not to ask the students to turn on their cameras, also because of social and family obligations, which involved around wearing the hijab. Just in general, it's just frowned upon to show the space, that you occupy, the personal family space. So those small things really added up. And those were, the deal breakers, if you will, in terms of whether you had a positive experience or a negative one. And we wanted to keep it as fact-based as possible. So even the policies that we came up with for VLE committees and educational committees and whatnot, we really tried to use this data as our stepping stone for making those policies. So the whole point of this conversation is to try and have a sustainable VLE. Why? Because we have one of the highest rates, especially in Kuwait, of school closures. We experienced this in COVID. We were the last people to open our schools, as well as recently, for the past few years, we've had environmental issues, right? So we've had the dust that kept us away from schools, and many of our, even my kids, if there's dust in the air and it's not considered an official day off, I let them stay home because they have, certain allergies and whatnot. So in Kuwait, it's essential to keep this sustainable because we don't know when the next flood is going to be, or it's essential. And besides, we have an industrial revolution of some sort that's taking us to the next level of technology. We really got to embrace this stuff. So we have to put an emphasis on concrete and relevant knowledge and how we go about presenting that and sharing that with the next generation. The conventional way of copying and cramming and reproducing and regurgitating is just not working anymore. We need to embrace what's out there. The reason why we learned a certain math back in the days because we didn't have calculators readily available. Now it's time to look at these curriculums and reinvent them and really try to prepare the next generation for the next 20 years. And it seems that in order to do that, we're going to have to cram a lot more if we're going to use the same curriculum. Something's got to give. We really got to look at where we're going. New Kuwait 2035 vision, there's a whole pillar on education and technology and moving forward with that. Lessons from COVID. Archiving is crucial. Having a creative outlet to explore one's feelings, connecting and having contingency plans. We must have contingency plans in place. I was really saddened when I heard that. I don't know if this is official or not, but they basically canceled this, online culture in the public school settings. And this is really a big setback. We just got the ball rolling. Yes, it was a catastrophe. It wasn't the best of experiences, but we really have to try and go back and make it something that we can use in a positive way. It's also essential to document real life experiences. So here's what happened. In some of the papers that we sent out, of course, as you know, publications, academic publications take a long time. So if I sent it out in 2020, this one was pretty quick because the first one, the one that was published in the Society and Social Policy Journal, because they made a quick call for COVID. But typically it would take about 6 months, even up to a year. So in one of the papers, it came back and they told us to review the paper in accordance with today's VLE evolvement. So this was a VLE paper that was written right when virtual learning environments were still being explored. And then once we got the reviews back, they told us, well, there's a lot more references you can use. And now VLEs are, papers are plenty and you can use all that information. And we refused because at the time that information wasn't available. So we felt that my co-author and I felt that it would take away from that authenticity. On the bright side, it somehow normalized parenthood. This idea of being locked down really gave us, took us back to what's essential in life. And one of the things that we don't speak about is normalizing parenthood. And this was very relevant to the learning experience because, again, going back to the frame of reference, in Kuwait or in the Arab world, once the woman, at least in, within a certain age range, she's married and she has children. So many of them, the majority of them are within that age range that, such obligations exist. So it normalized that a little bit and gave them the confidence to go ahead and believe that they can achieve things without having to have rigid schedules. It shed the light on advantages of e-learning that, if you're sick. I remember one of the ladies was sick. And one of her friends called her on WhatsApp and she was trying to hide her phone in my classroom because it was on video. And the girl was in the hospital trying to follow up with my class. And of course, I allowed her once I knew. It made things, the impossible possible. Now you can get things done and you can get them done from anywhere. Of course, it was to an extreme, but I think, in retrospect, this is something that we can elaborate on. This is what I mean by normal. This is us, my family. Two of them were sick at the time. One of them was studying, but obviously he was watching YouTube, pretending he was studying, online learning, my own job, the kids being in lockdown, making sure that they're emotionally and socially aware of what's going on and really trying to get things done. It created a whole new dimension of, chaos, but at the same time, opportunity. Gaining valuable insights, PED, and best practice. These are, what we're, your personal development and best practice. We're looking at how to do that. We have to look at what's going on internationally, locally. We need formal and informal feedback. You're always looking for information. It's not just, we must only do survey. No, you get what you get. You get what you can grab with your hands. This is the lessons that I learned, at least from COVID. Future outlook, embracing the changing modes of engagement, especially with e-learning. It should be definitely something we can enhance the learning experience with, give more flexibility, be less harsh with the attendance consequences, right? It's very doable. Perhaps the way we did it during lockdown was extreme, but now there is definitely a way we can filter that. Women were asking for more logistical support. Once we started the hybrid thing where they were expected to come back abruptly, a lot of women said, listen, I can't just leave my kids. They're still at home doing COVID. So a lot of them were asking, well, why don't we have, for example, a place where we can call a diwaniya. You know, a lot of times men would turn a cafeteria into a diwaniya, but women couldn't do that. They couldn't just, you know, take their shoes off, or, you know what I mean? So they were asking for a little bit more, maybe flexibility and a little bit more understanding when it came to education and the way that they were being educated. If you want me back in the classroom, you're going to have to give in a little. There are some demands that need to be met. Some of them said, why, you know, we have babysitting services in malls. Why don't we have them in the university? We'll pay extra for them. You know, imagine that, a place where a woman can leave her baby next door to, this is essential. This is now going into 2023. These are things we talked about in the 90s, but now why wouldn't we make them happen? All right, so that's all I've got for you for today. I hope that was right on time. I was maybe 1 minute over. And thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the talk. And if you have any questions, please be my guest.
Thank you so much, Dr. Randa, for a brilliant presentation. I really like it. And mostly it's, you know, a real case to say study and what's happened in the pandemic. I have two things. First of all, what you advise the professor or doctors in all over the world for teaching, let's say, after the pandemic. If you have any advice based on your, you know, the things that you learned from the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, the number one thing that really opened my eyes was we were being really strict. We were being really, not in ways of educating, but we were really strict and almost too formal in the way that we approached it. So we don't want to be open where everybody can come and say, you know, give me an A or have an excuse 10 times a month. You know, it's not that. It's a little bit more, we can keep the rules, but we can also see different ways of helping one another. I think this was my number one thing. And the second advice is just always keep in contact. A lot of us saw that during the pandemic, those who were helping each other in the classrooms or in the company or in the university, they were the ones who took the lead. And then the other ones almost fell behind, the ones that really didn't help, or they would, you know, just stay in their rooms or in their offices with the door closed. The pandemic really opened our eyes to the need and the importance of communication and keeping the networking going.
All right, thank you. Also, Dr. Randa, let's say, inshallah, but let's say we have another pandemic, okay?
Inshallah.
Inshallah. But if you have, you know, a power or you can change something in education, what you will change?
I would change the way that we our expectations. I would expect the way that we grade them, for example, the assessments that we give. I would definitely turn it more into a project-based learning, a PBL, which is also not a new, it's not a new idea. It's nothing, nothing really that will take away from the student experience. As a matter of fact, it will enhance the student experience. Online, there's really some assessments that you just can't do unless you're expecting students to cheat. You can't just give them an exam and say, don't cheat. You know, it doesn't go that way, whether you like it or not. So, and then what I didn't like was that it was always pointing the fingers away from our responsibility. The students cheated. The students were wrong. No, if you give them an assessment that's behind the screen, they're going to help themselves, right? So I didn't appreciate the way that that was being presented. If you didn't want them to get to this point, you shouldn't have given them this type of assessment. You could have, my solution would have been either a pass or fail. Stop giving them the grades, for example, A, B, and C. Either it's a pass, fail, for example. We could have had a project-based learning where we gave them something to talk about their experience in COVID. Of course, mathematics and, you know, things that we can't really, you know, do otherwise would have a problem with this. But there are always creative and fun, interactive ways that you can get a grade, but it doesn't always have to be an exam. You know what I mean? Could be an oral exam. I could talk to you about this. I can give you, you know, a topic and you kind of like a Viva defense. So there's different ways we can approach it, I think.
We do everything, but nothing happens. They're still cheap.
Nothing. It's, but here's the thing. The way that we do education, yes, it's very high. It's very likely that they will, not that they're being dishonest, but also you have to understand that they weren't really engaging. They weren't really learning from us. I think there's too many elements for me to say, I blame them for cheating. No, I don't. Like, for example, I was helping my children. You know what I mean? Like, I have to be honest with I was helping my children because they didn't understand. So yeah, in that loom home. So it's not just the way the assessments was. It was just chaos. To me, we could have either taken a gap year and enjoyed the time that we had with our families, or pass fail. Why are we going through this whole mess? Pass fail with some limitations, and then we'll figure it out. سافرنا وردينا. We went to like 5 different schools during the Gulf War, and we still graduated on time. This was another issue that I had with parents. Our children are falling behind. Who are you comparing your children to? Who? The whole world is in lockdown. The whole world is suffering. So maybe our standards need to be a little bit in tune with what's going on.
I have a question from Dr. Nadia. Dr. Nadia, go on.
Dr. Randa, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Hello, Allah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I really liked it. I just want to comment on what you just said. I totally agree with you that we could have done it differently. I taught in KSAN, and then I'm teaching now in UAE. And I find that in certain universities, we are so committed to the ways we assess students. I mean, I don't know about the case in Kuwait, but in these countries, we have course files to work on. And, national accreditation centers, they sometimes commit us to the type of questions and the type of assessments we use to, evaluate our students. And not all of them are really compatible with the pandemic and the online educations. Some of them are really encouraging on cheating, and they steer us away from proper education, if I might say. So how do you handle this? I mean, I understand that there are creative ways, but they are not always permitted or allowed or given to us to use.
Absolutely. I mean, we had the same obstacles to the point where I had to fight left and right, where we created a VLE committee, internal committee, that said there's just some things I can't do. There's just some things that
exactly.
If I do I'm restricted. So at the time, they were generous enough, at least in on a national level, to allow us to make those calls to some degree. Of course, there was no there was no expectation, or there was no forcefulness on anything. So the ministry would say, this is what we advise. And then they gave us the final word on how to go about it, so long as it was within a certain criterion. But I understand the frustration. So, I mean, what can you do? The best you can do is probably argue your cases, or at least help in whatever way you could as a teacher. And or those who are, this is why fact-based policy making is very important. The only way that my institute or the seniors that I was dealing with, that they were convinced, is when they saw the data. So again, this can help once you start digging in a little deeper. 90% of I have over 60% women in my university. And those females were that bunch that I described as being, 100% Kuwaiti. They live with their in-laws. They just couldn't turn their cameras on no matter what you did. So based on those simple statistics, I was able to say, listen, this is just not happening.
I totally agree, because I remember I was working in one university in KSA, and they obligated everyone to open the cameras, but then there was separation. We didn't have to teach boys and girls on the same classes. So when you force people to open the cameras, they really can't do much as they would when cameras are not open. And I honestly, this is why I asked you, because I really like Dr. Ahmed's questions. What بعد الشر, if we have another pandemic, how are we going to be able to handle things differently? Because I don't see it being applicable when it comes to, when you look to the the policies and procedures that are being adapted nowadays in education. I mean, we can barely stop cheating and maintain a good education level when we are coming to universities and we're teaching them face-to-face and giving them, on-campus exams. So what will happen if we face another pandemic? And that's actually when you look at everything that is taking place now in the world, you think it's a possibility. It's not something that is out of perception,
It's definitely not far-fetched. I agree with you. And this is why, it's so much easier said than done, unfortunately, Dr. Nadia, because it's like, yes, we have to have a contingency plan. Yes, we must work on this and embrace and enhance. But to be fair and to be within this reality, the scope of the reality that we're facing, we don't have time. I can barely keep up with the expectations, as you said. I can say it till I'm blue in the face. So my advice, if I could, which is something that I'm actually pushing for over here, keep those committees alive. And every once in a while, at least once a semester or twice a semester, let's see what we learn and try to put that back into that ecosystem so that once, la samahallah, it happens again, it's not so strange and, absurd. And it's just not setting people up to fail. So, inshallah.
I totally agree. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation.
Most welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Nadia. Yeah. What else? So as Dr. Nadia said, also, it's not the first pandemic. Okay, we had several pandemic before, but maybe here because in this pandemic we are in 5G and internet, and mostly we have a lot of application, like you said, Zoom, same as me. I don't know about Zoom at all, mainly Skype, and that's it. After that, from the pandemic came many of applications come up, like Teams, Blackboard, Zoom, and many other applications. I think that's good and somehow, because there is a big competitive between those companies, which help us to I think to learn more. As I said, for example, let's have ITAR. Now about 3 years, I invite several professors around the world. Before that, no, we have to fly from country to country to learn from this professor and that doctor. I remember, and also the conferences. If we travel to US, maybe it will cost us more than 2,000 KD just to listen to this doctor or professor and what he talk about. But now we can, yes, there is fees, but not like that cost that if we fly to US, or to UK or any other countries. So I think, the pandemic did many things in education in negative side, but it also have a positive side, in my opinion. It helped us and it improved the education, and somehow, in some point, let's say, for those who want to learn. Okay, but those who don't want to learn, I think the cheating, it was easier than before. We can't monitor them. We tried harder. This is not by me. Many professors, and also as you and Dr. Nadia agreed in that. We try to monitor them, we try to do this stuff, but we can't, and somehow. For example, people who can't open the cameras, also girls who wear niqab or hijab or this stuff. We have several stuff, we can't handle it.
No, I totally understand. This is something, there was, again, whatever I at the time could get away with, so long as it was within the rules and regulations. So for example, I have a 25% in-class assessment, and typically I would do a 10% quiz, quiz 1, quiz 2, and then maybe, a paper or something. But during the pandemic, I decided, like you said, to use these advantages of attending seminars, So what I used to do, for example, I would give, let's say, because I'm a management lecturer, right? So I would say, CV writing workshop. So I would do the workshop via Zoom, and I don't care if your camera is on and off because I'm not taking attendance. And then I would say, if you don't want to do the assessment, or this is your 5% bonus assessment, now could you please tell me in writing what you learned? So this is one of the ways that I got a little bit creative within the realms or the requirements of my entity. Like you're saying, it has a vast reach as well. So for example, I read a lot of marketing books, and of course, the father of modern day marketing, who is Philip Kotler, Dr. Philip Kotler, it was like my dream to attend one of his conferences. And, you know, within the pandemic, you know, once people started doing all these Zoom meetings, I was able to attend one of his conferences, and he was live, and this was a dream come true, because on a normal day, I would never know where to find him, let alone be invited to a conference and make it to the United States and back in one day. You know, it's impossible. So these are the types of assignments I was able to get away with under the umbrella of project-based learning. Some of the seminars I was doing, some of the seminars I would ask them to go and attend. For example, there's MIT has the open learning, Harvard has the open learning, which is all pre-recorded seminars. So I would say, pick a topic and tell me all about it, right? So I would have, you know, a 5-10 minute conversation of what they learned, because we all know also we have a big problem with copy paste. They would buy an assignment. So I started trying to, you know, learn what they learned. Miss, بس إحنا الإنجليزي عندنا مو زين. Listen, you can talk in Chinese for all I care, right? It's important that you speak English, but if you get stuck in a word or two that you cannot say, that's okay, right? I'm not going to take points off. So yeah, it's definitely helped.
At least they answer your question, and the purpose of that, we know you understand what you are saying or what you wrote in your paper. This is I think this is the thing that we are waiting for their answers, and that's what happened actually. Yes, I did a lot of assessment and this stuff, but after put it in you know, the program like Turnitin and others, check the similarities and plagiarism and this stuff. If we find a high similarity, we ask him to come or ask her to come and discuss this stuff, and you know, the questions and this stuff to understand or make sure that he didn't copy or do something illegal or yeah. So that's it. Anyone have any question? Any questions so far?
Or your own experiences. If you've had, you know, similar or different experiences from where you are, whatever part of town, please do share them with us.
Yeah.
How was your experience during the COVID, and what did you do differently? So we want to learn from other people as well.
Yeah, why not? If anyone, please, yani, share with us your experience in your university. Or yeah, for me, I try to do some applications, the games application like Kahoot and this stuff, to make them engage with my lecture. Yani, try to encourage them and try to do this, but you know, it was so hard to let them do, because I don't know what's happened after, yani, behind the screen, if they are sleeping or they are playing some games, I don't know, but you know, that's what's happened, and this is the fact, and inshallah it won't happen again. And let's learn from what's happened and improve our teaching in nowadays after the pandemic. And doesn't mean that we finish or we done with the pandemic and everything that we learned from this period, forget it. No, we can take those some of those things that we learn and improve it and do it and continue doing it in right now after the pandemic, like some of meetings, for example, or doing some extra class, or doing some stuff that or workshop or others that will help the student and us in Zoom or other application.
Yeah, I have a good question for you as well. What parts, you just touched up on it too, what parts of the pandemic experience with online would you keep? Because for me, when we had to go back to classroom learning, of course, we had a little bit, maybe 1 week or 2 week or transition, whatever. But for me, one of the things that I would definitely keep is recordings. The recordings were phenomenal because you didn't have to repeat. The students who missed something were, they could go back, and even the students who didn't miss something, they just want to review. You didn't have to spend a whole week at the end of the semester reviewing. Everything was documented. To me, it was a scary experience because I felt very vulnerable I'm not used to it. Yes, I put my pictures online, but talking, and sometimes as an educator, I'm sure you've all been through this. It's, oh my God, what did I say? And it's on camera now, and
yes.
it wasn't that easy. But once we got the hang of it, no, I mean, I would definitely keep that element.
Yes. I'm still doing it actually. So the student can watch again the lecture, and if they have some excuse, they didn't attend the class, so they can watch it again and learn from it. If they ask me, I directly ask them if they watch the video or not. If no, please don't ask me now. Watch the video and come again later on, so we can discuss. Now, Dr. Nadia have a question or maybe share her experience. Go ahead, Dr. Nadia.
Hi, can you hear me? I don't know why you got me out.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you're good.
So yeah, Dr. Randa, when you asked the questions, I immediately raised my hands because I wanted to say recordings. It's not something that I would personally keep. I'm actually completely against recording lectures for so many reasons. But when we asked the students, they all had like a really bad impression about online education, even those who didn't have to leave their jobs or houses to come to uni, especially when universities or campuses are far from their homes, they still wanted to come. They still rather enjoyed attending lectures in person. But recording is the one thing that they actually said that they wanted to keep. I personally wouldn't do this because I still had to do revisions for them. Revisions included things that are very much different than lectures. So, in my revisions, for example, I try to practice, them on how to answer questions in the exams. I teach in law, so we do a lot of cases that we're not always able to present in our lectures. So there's a side for reviewing and reviews that are still important even when you're recording. And but I did find a very downside for recording lectures, and that's that students never really wanted or cared for attending. They always had this backup plan, like if we don't come to university and we attend the lecture in person, we can always hear to the recording, which I don't know, I'm sure it's the same for other colleges, but for law, being on time and committing and punctuality is very important, very, very important. So I would never do recording. But the other thing that I would keep from the online experience is the intense use of tech tools. So I've never had to give quizzes or assignments or exams or surveys online before the pandemic. We always had to rely on paper use, which was not good for the planet, at least. And
Amen.
when we started using the Moodle Blackboard and started giving quizzes to students online, it made things easier, even not just for the students, but for us as well, because we didn't have to do as much marking because things get marked by themselves. And it was so much easier, even for preparing course files. Taking you don't have to scan everything. You just have to take screenshots or documents online. So I would definitely keep that. That was very beneficial. It's keeping up with the tech that is taking place everywhere now. But recording, I faced, and what you just said. I mean, so many students, especially in private universities, they care more about the grades than the education itself. And so when you are saying anything that is recording, you feel people who are hunting for mistakes. and they stop at every little thing you say. And I don't think professors, lecturers, teachers should be monitoring each and every word they say. There should be a certain level of flexibility and freedom and friendliness between, to a certain level, of course, between a lecturer and a student that you cannot maintain. I was very serious. I remember the feedback I received when the first semester when we had online lectures was so different than the feedback I received the second semester when we had on-campus lecture. Everyone used to say she's so serious. She never, says anything outside the subject that she's teaching. She never allows us to, discuss things that are not related to the course. And I did that on purpose. And I didn't like myself, but I couldn't do any other, I honestly, because when, my dad is a professor and he used to tell us when you're giving a lecture, you need to have breaks so the student can focus with you. So you can tell a joke, for example, you can ask someone about something personal in their lives. This breaks help them maintain focus. And I couldn't do this. I could never do this when the lecture is recorded. And it's much more fun to give on-campus lectures just because, they are not being recorded. So that's just my input on your question. Sorry for the long answer.
No, it's very interesting that different people and different, you can't really pinpoint it. You can't really say because you were in that country or because you're teaching this certain subject or because the subject required them to have discipline. It's very interesting to see the variations that came about from these learning experiences. But I definitely understand where you're coming from. And that's the ideals that we were researching in one of the papers, that these informalities that you get to build, and we actually have one coming out on student rapport and relationships with the teachers in hybrid learning. And what we actually discovered in this one, it's just being published now. Rapport is all of the stuff that you're talking about. So how you communicate with the teacher, how if they feel they understand you, they get your jokes, this kind of stuff. دمك خفيف, you know what I mean? This is the impressions that they have. And this is proven in education to be one of the influential factors for a successful outcome. So I had, in this particular paper, actually, we saw that if given the two scenarios, whether hybrid or in person, they definitely preferred in person. But if given hybrid or online, our students preferred online. The main finding was that hybrid made them lose their mind, where it was they couldn't focus, in the classroom, they couldn't build these relationships with the teachers. 1 week was online, 1 week it was really distorting in a lot of ways. But it goes back to your point that there's just some things, no matter how good of a teacher you are restricted, you feel restricted, you can't do certain things, you can't talk about certain topics. But I know for me, why I say the recordings are important, I understand your school of thought and I understand your train of thought. But for me, I would review as I'm going along. My way of teaching was that, for example, I would finish the one chapter a week or whatever. And within those what's it called, the lectures, I would review and ask a million questions and ask questions in a way that I would ask them for the prep for the final exams. So I would do that religiously. I would reiterate, because that's for us with these given students. And I have to give you a little bit of background. Kuwait has one of the lowest or is really experiencing a bad wave of education indicators, especially from those who are coming from the high school going into higher education. So one way that they just can't get away from me is reiterate until you're going to sleep and remember what I'm going to. That was my promise to them. So to me, the recordings were important because if you miss one class, there could be something that I couldn't fit in when it came down to these. But like you said, I think they get lazy. If you give them a choice, they get lazy. And they probably would prefer to stay at home most of the time. But then again, I have to go back to being objective. Is it they're paying for a service? I'm not their mother. And I want them to get this education. However, I can't force them to be in a classroom where they're sitting there, watching YouTube videos. And this happens a lot. And I can't kick them out of the classroom. So, luckily, this is a handful of people.
Yeah, I totally agree. You cannot kick them. But I, for one, never allow any student to use their text in class. It's not at the university, I mean, allows me to do this. So, and I'm, you know, yes, you are paying for the service, and guess what? You will get it. So pay attention at least. You know what I mean?
You got to have the ecosystem in place. And I think if you have the right policies and procedures, like for me, I just can't do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you're supported. And this is, you know, how you can get it right.
But it wasn't always, because I worked at multiple universities over the past few years. And I know this year, for example, I told you that the first semester was online, second semester was on campus. And some of the doctors, when they went to on-campus teaching, they decided to keep recording the lectures. I decided I will never record, you know, the lectures unless there is a student who's suffering from COVID and couldn't come. So I will record just for that student. And the university supported that policy, fortunately. But we found that doctors who are not recording had a much higher level of attendance than those who did recording. And the funny thing is, I mean, how many of your students are going to rehear the lecture again? The only ones who would do this are the top students, the students who really care about getting high marks by doing effort. Others will really not be bothered. I mean, they will not listen to you even in the lectures to go back and hear a lecture again, a recorded lecture, which is it offers them far more, far less focus than an on-campus lectures. I mean, you're listening to some voice. You're not even seeing. I mean, for me, I know for a fact that body language, face expressions, and you seeing the face expression of the students can help you determine whether they understand, they need a follow-up, you know, they are steering away, they are focused. The body language is very important. Eye contact is very important in teaching. And when you're recording just a voice, you're not even open a camera. It takes so much of the whole process.
Yeah, definitely. No, you reminded me of something that I read. They were comparing the number of times students early on in the COVID, and when Moodle was just, you know, climbing up the chart in popularity. They were comparing the number of times students accessed Moodle, whether it be for recording or whatever it was, and comparing it to the grades. And that's exactly what they found, that only a handful of students actually go back and, you know, look at these recordings. And only, you know, a few of those actually benefit from them in terms of, you know, the higher number. There really isn't much on that. And I think for me, the recordings were essential just because that transition period back, maybe for now, maybe for now, this is essential because a lot of the women, like a lot of the women, they had to switch their schedules. Yeah, there wasn't really much of an intermission where, you know, they went into the semester hoping it was going to be fully online, and that's what they were promised. And then what do you know? In the middle of the semester, they gave them 1 week's notice. And I understood that as a female, as a mother, you know what I mean? It just, you couldn't do it. So so to me, I said, guys, here's the recordings. I can't not put you absent, but what I can do is allow you to experience it as you would be in class, at least for the time being.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Nadia.
No, yes, thank you. Dr. Randa and Dr. Ahmed, I think maybe in the future we should consider the psychological effect of COVID on students and teachers, not just on students, because so many, I mean, I will talk about myself. I suffered tremendously during this area. It affected my social life, my mental health, my physical health. It hit everywhere, and not without you realizing. The funny thing, it happened so quietly and so secretly that you woke up one day finding that you're not the same person anymore, and you don't know what happened. You were just staying at home. So I think this kind of influence, if the teachers, if the professors are affected, you can imagine the younger generation had suffered tremendously from it. So I think maybe perhaps at some point we should do some webinar on that. And I think it would be very exciting. It will touch everyone some way or another.
I think we should do a conference. I think we should have an in-person conference.
Yes. I think if I know so many people who would be delighted to speak in something like that. I'm one of them.
It's so interesting. You hit the spot where when you said you woke up one day and you realize you're a different person. I'm still trying to fathom that. I'm still trying to see. I mean, I know I've come a long way. I'm telling you, when I sat in the pandemic, I had 0 publications, and right now I have 22. And this is something that, and it was an epiphany moment where, you know, so many things change, and you just don't know until you somehow, you know, at some point look back in retrospect. And I get it. I know what you mean. But yeah, let's do that. In that one paper.
You know, sorry, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
لا تفضلي.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. I think that the worst thing about that is that in the Middle East, there's some sort of a stigma when you start saying, I'm not mentally doing well. People are so scared to speak up about it. And the more you're quiet, the more you're suffering, and the more you're making everyone around you suffer. And in a job like ours, when you're constantly interacting with younger generation who are looking up to you and trying to get something out of you one way or another, even on a personal and social level, moral levels, it's so difficult. I've seen that happen in one of the universities I worked for, where people who are teaching are very depressed, that they are, you know, suffering, making everyone around them suffer, their students, their colleagues, and they're not even realizing. And you can see that they are not doing well. So you're not even able to blame them, because how would you blame someone who is sick, who has cancer, who's suffering physically? You wouldn't. So why not treat them the same way the people? I don't want to say mentally ill, but it is some sort of a mental illness. And even if it's temporary, even if it's something that comes and goes, but so many suffered in so many ways, and no one is saying anything about that. I haven't seen, only in the Western societies, that they are speaking up about that. Sometimes in Egypt now I see it happening, but I haven't seen anyone addressing this issue, and it's a huge issue. I wouldn't be able to tell you that I'm recovering even. I'm still at the beginning of the recovery process. You know, I'm still trying to get back to social. At some point, I feel that I've lost such a huge part of my social skills of, you know, how to talk and deal with people and see people face to face. It's gone. And I have absolutely no idea how to get it back, how to get back on track. And I think no one is addressing this issue. And if us, you know, the grown-ups, the independent women and men, the people who have so much freedom and liberal personally and, you know, socially, what about the youngsters, you know, people who are not able to say anything, who follow a certain cultural and traditional stigma? What can they do? Who would they go to?
No one, unfortunately. And this is why I tried my best. I saw how my children were being treated, and it really bothered me that at some point they were taking feedback from NGOs instead of taking feedback on how to run a VLE and how to do it in a way that was emotionally acceptable for students who were in lockdown, elementary and high schools and whatnot. They were calling NGOs. Why don't you call the teachers that are actually in the classroom?
Yes.
Yeah, as a parent, really frustrated me. So this is when I really decided to take initiative.
But are we prepared as teachers to deal with this? I mean, are we trained?
No.
This is another
Not
issue.
only are we trained, I'm telling you, the social stigma part of this was a big deal even for, I mean, these are things we don't discuss, but I had to go through some things with my husband because this was being recorded. And this was, the lecturers had to keep their, they didn't allow us to turn off our cameras. You know, they were understanding, but, you know, at the end of the day, this wasn't an easy transition for teachers.
No.
You know, and just again, this whole, anonymity and privacy, I think a lot of that went out the window. But it gave us transparency, at least. Like, for example, again, I try to look at it from different points of view. When I see what my teachers or what my children's teacher is doing in the classroom, I know that as a teacher, this is frustrating, but there are some things that were positive out of this. At least when it came to my kids' education, I can see that some teachers were better than others, something I would never be able to see on a regular basis. Some teachers were actually screaming at the children, you know what I mean? Some teachers were just telling them to go watch YouTube. So, but then again, we go back to square one. Everybody was under some kind of pressure and expectation. But did we really have the tools or training to
that's what I'm saying.
Through?
I for one, I get scared to give advice to people if I'm not trained enough to handle you know, certain issues like, you know, depression, mental health. And I've seen so many students coming up for people and they're asking them for advice, and I can tell that, you know, the advice you're being given is so wrong. It's so wrong. Get over it.
Yes.
We're all facing this. Just why are you being so spoiled? You know, if someone comes to you and tells you like, I'm not doing well, I don't feel well, you call them spoiled? Come on. It was a disgrace, honestly. And I don't know how many of us are trained
and they're
to
very
handle that.
impressionable.
Yes. And in education, I mean, I teach law, you're in business management. That, you know, every one of us come from a different academic background, but are we trained to deal with students who are suffering? Are we trained to deal with students who may have some, you know, psychological problems? Are we ourselves 100%, you know, mentally healthy to give advice? Some of us aren't. I mean, I've seen it. We all seen it. So I think this can be a very interesting topic.
I think this is, we need to have it for, you know, a whole day.
Yes.
In person, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Randa and Dr. Ahmed. This was very, very much enjoyable. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your attendance.
Yeah, Dr. Randa, thank you for your time. I think we take more than we should have. So thank you so much for your effort and your time, Dr. Randa. You are always, you know, around when we invite you to do a webinar. So I want to personally thank you so much for that. If you have a last word, Dr. Randa, before we end today's webinar.
Oh, first of all, thank you again, you know, for all of this, everything that you give back to the society. Really, you're one of a kind, and what you're doing is really impacting and even helping us communicate with one another, meeting each other. I know a lot of people that I network with are from your network as well. So I really do appreciate the work that you do. Every experience counts and every voice needs to be heard. How we go about it in the positions that we're at is what's going to either progress us or take us back. A lot of, you know, you guys, whoever's attending this seminar, or even Dr. Ahmed, who's initiating these seminars, we're trying to make an impact and really, you know, try to influence the future in a positive way. But we see a lot of people who are in these positions that are doing nothing. And sometimes it feels like it's a war. So keep it up, keep going. We're going to find, you know, I call us the resistance. We're going to find more of us that are going to bond and find ways to change these policies, or at least influence them in one way or another. So one hand, you know, the proverb in Arabic is one hand cannot clap. You know, we always have to put our hands together to get things done and change the world. Good luck to everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Randa. I really appreciate it. Inshallah, next
My
week,
pleasure.
Webinar with a new keynote speaker with the new topic. Thank you again, Dr. Randa. Appreciate your time. And also I want to thank all who is watching us on YouTube or on Zoom. Thank you so much, and see you inshallah next week. Assalamu alaikum.
مع السلامة. شكرا.